In reporting these wars and all the experiences you get abroad firsthand, I mean, obviously you're going to start developing opinions. How does that tie into being a journalist?
Well, I try to keep my opinions out, and I think if anybody read my coverage, say, of the Iraq or Afghan wars, they wouldn't see any opinion creeping in there. At the same time, I'm informed by what I see on the ground. If I see there's problems or things aren't going the way the military or the government says, then I'll report that. That's not opinion, that's just observing facts on the ground. I'll give the military their say, obviously. If I'm doing a story that says, well, things, the training of the Afghan army is not going well, and there are this problems and this problems and these problems, I would go to the military and ask them, well, what do you think? And they would, give me a reasonable answer, but the thrust of the story would be there are huge problems here. Whereas the military would say, oh, the training's going very well. And I think things like that need to be pointed out. Civilian casualties is another big issue. I did a long story where I spent several weeks in Afghanistan going around to different spots where there had been allegations of civilian casualties and really looking into it, talking to the people involved. I went to like 25 different sites around the country where the U.S. basically said, oh, there's minimal civilian casualties and we're very careful. We know what we're hitting and we won't strike if we think there are civilians there. But I found in many of these cases there had been civilians killed that hadn't been reported. It was basically documenting what had happened, and the essence of the story was that civilian casualties, there were more of them and they were more serious than had been reported, and that the U.S. was extremely accurate in hitting a target, which wasn't the problem. The problem was knowing what the target was, and that's where the breakdown came. I also found out in many cases the U.S. would rely on local militiamen who would have a grudge against someone in a particular village and would claim, oh, they're Taliban there, and the U.S. would rely on that. But it was strictly a grudge thing, and they would end up hitting a place and killing civilians. So, that's the kind of thing that you can only tell if you go to the scene and talk to people. I didn't go in there with a particular point of view. I went in there with the idea of, let's find out what really happened and let's see what the situation really is.
How do you handle if you do get information that you believe is unreliable from the military or a civilian?
You have to make judgments on everything people tell you. I mean, in all kinds of reporting, you have to dig in deeply enough so that you at least are aware and your antenna goes up when you hear information that doesn't sound right, and then you check it out and you try to verify it. And if you get enough evidence and do enough reporting, you can then raise questions in your reporting about what one side or another is saying and lay out the facts and let people judge.
With Iraq, there was misconceptions within the press. What is the role of a foreign correspondent in making sure people home know what is going on abroad?
Well, the role is to challenge authority, to get out on the ground, don't report from a distance, get out on the ground, talk to people involved, spend time asking questions, going around and finding out what is happening in reality on the ground, and whether that challenges or supports, one particular point of view, that's fine. But if the American public really had to rely on the government or the military, or in the case of Afghanistan, the Afghan government or the Afghan police, or Afghan politicians for the true story, you would never get the true story, because everybody has a point of view and everybody is pushing a policy or a strategy, and you need to get between that and get down below the strategy and the talk and find out what's really happening.
Do you think journalists are fulfilling this role?
Oh yeah, I think so. I think the coverage in Afghanistan has been mostly accurate, aggressive, not cynical but skeptical of the official line, not only from the U.S. but from the Afghan government. There's been incredible, reporting on corruption in the Afghan government. And, the problems with the police and the army have been well documented. The problems with U.S. policy have been well documented, and a lot of assumptions have been challenged over the years through very good reporting by newspapers, radio, TV.
Do you have fears for the industry in the future? Newspaper has made a lot of cutbacks. Even today it was announced that Newsweek is going to exclusively online,
right,
and a lot of jobs are going to be cut there. Is there a concern for you that this link might be, or resources might be pulled back?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's already happened. When I started going overseas 30 years ago, there were all kinds of, the networks were always, had bureaus set up. Many newspapers had bureaus. The wires were there. You go there now, the TV networks have almost no bureaus. They would have something in London. I mean, they'll still send people out, but they don't have the bureaus who are there every day and describing what's happening in a country or region. There are very few newspapers anymore who have correspondents permanently stationed overseas. The LA Times is one of them. But we've cut our foreign staff in half in the last several years because of budget cuts. We have half as many people as we used to. And I don't think there's the thorough day-to-day coverage. I think what's being lost is actually living in a country, being there day-to-day, or in a region, and covering it day-to-day. You just build this wealth of knowledge that you can't replace by just going in. In my case, I would be a better reporter if I lived in Afghanistan year-round, but I've been there 15 times over the years, so I do have some sense of what's happening there, but it would still be better if I were based there. And we do have somebody who's based there, and they do a great job because they're there. I did find, when I was based overseas in South Africa and in Beirut before that, I did the best reporting I've ever done because I was there so long, knew the situation was out every day, and I felt like I was the authority on that story. And I knew a lot, and in fact, I had this experience, and other reporters have had it too. In places like these, you would go to the American Embassy just to talk to people. You just usually make the rounds of embassies to talk to them. And they would ask me what was going on, like a place like Iraq where the diplomats just don't get out because it's too dangerous and it's very difficult to get out. And when they go out, they're in a bubble and only talking to officials. So they would be very interested when I would go there, or other reporters would go there, and they always quiz you about, wow, what's really happening out there because we can't get out. And it just shows you the value of journalists and being out and seeing what's happening on the ground.
You've written articles, series, books, and one of your books is now becoming a movie. What do you believe is the best way to inform people?
I still believe in newspapers because newspapers can go into depth in a way that TV can't, unless it's something like 60 Minutes or a documentary. Yes, they can go into great detail, but in day-to-day reporting, TV doesn't have the depth of newspapers, particularly local TV. If you compare coverage of local TV to a local newspaper, the newspaper wins hands down. They have a much larger staff. They cover everything. The TV stations tend to get their direction and their sense of what's going on by reading the newspaper every morning because it's so thorough. If you packed everything in a 30-minute local TV report, because some of it's weather, some of it's sports, just the actual news, it would fit into basically one page in the crime blotter of a typical newspaper, because so much of what they do is crime because it's easy to do. They do some politics, but if you squeezed it into the newspaper, it would take up a page or two. So I think newspapers are still the best way for news, and I'm talking about online as well as in print. And newspapers have figured out now through online how to cover breaking news and to have a 24-hour news cycle, whereas before everything would be focused for all day long. You're writing for the next day's paper, and now you're writing moment to moment and you're updating. And I think that's a real service too, that people can go and instantly find out what's happening. And I think newspapers are very good at that. The wire services are very reliant on newspapers for what's going on because they don't have the manpower that if you pool all the newspapers, they wouldn't have close to the manpower. So I still think newspapers are the engines that drive the news and drive what is considered important and sets basically the agenda for news.